Thank you everyone for joining us today. The relationship between China and the rest of the world, notably Europe and the United States, is without doubt going to be the enduring story of this century. I'm joined today by Dr. Wang Huiyao, President and Counselor to China's State Council, who's going to take stock together with me in this conversation of where this relationship is going. I'm Peter Mandelson, founder and chairman of Global Counsel, which in recent years has developed a significant China footprint. We have seen demand for our services of policy analysis and analysis of political risk from Chinese corporates grow as the political and policy environment becomes more challenging. We're also advising international companies and investors on China inbound issues. A number of our financial services and natural resources clients are increasingly focusing on the Chinese market. And we're advising a growing number of UK, EU, and US-based investors on policy developments in China, from technology to real estate. In February this year, we were pleased to host a successful business dialogue with Premier Li Keqiang and the chairs and CEOs of nearly 30 of Europe's largest companies. And it was certainly more than a backslapping event. It was certainly not just a talking shop. We really got into some very detailed policy areas. And we hope to do more of these policy-based events in the coming months. Today, Dr. Wang and I will discuss the direction of Europe-China relations, looking at what is driving policy thinking in Beijing, in London, in Paris, Berlin, and Brussels. And importantly, how this is impacting what is an increasingly politicized global business environment. We will open up for questions towards the end of the discussion, so you can direct yours through the chat function if you want. So, Dr. Wang, perhaps we could start with the view from Beijing, because in Europe, there's definitely a change in tone regarding China, with more emphasis on trade defense, a heightened concern about technology and cybersecurity. And there's also more activism on human rights issues. The ratification process of the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, the CAI, has halted now. And EU countries are under pressure from the United States to treat China with suspicion, bordering on hostility. So let me ask you in the first place, how is Beijing regarding these developments in Europe? Is the Chinese government giving up on its dialogue with the EU in Brussels and simply concentrating on those national capitals in Europe where it might be more welcomed? Give us a sense politically, from the government's point of view, how these developments in Europe are viewed.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lord Mandelson. So thank you for having this dialogue. And it's really a great pleasure and to join you for this very meaningful discussion. I think, first of all, China is still plays a very much importance of relation with Europe, with EU countries. As a matter of fact, I know there's quite a few ambassadors, actually, former ambassadors are traveling in Europe right now, and China always holds a very strong, the high-level relation with EU, and President Xi has actually quite often spoke to EU leaders, to German, France, and Italy, Spain, and many other leaders. So I think that relationship is really important. I agree with your opening remark. Of course, the sentiment, the environment seems changing quite a bit. I think the reason for that is many factors. I think particularly last few years we have China-U.S. trade war. We had this tariff going on, and also current these 2 years, this pandemic doesn't certainly help the dialogue, the communication. So there's a lot of issues on that, and also, of course, there's a structural issues, there's economic frictions, and of course there's a communication problem as well. But I think in general, China plays a very important priority of relationship with EU from a government point of view, and also that, as a matter of fact, there's still a lot of European companies very active in China. The government-to-government dialogue is still open, and so it's those negative sentiment, somehow if there's in the European countries, is really depend how we can handle that, how we can have a dialogue, have a discussion, and have a really a mutual understanding of those issues. So I would, yeah.
Do you think that, I mean, after China's entry to the WTO in 2000, 2001, there was very much a sense of, Europe and America embracing the rise of China. Is there a feeling now, which has grown during the last 5 years, that policy has reversed, that we're no longer welcoming the rise of China, and that somehow, we want to put China down, or back in its place? I mean, what's the evaluation of the change that's occurred?
Yeah, you're right. I think that this year actually just marked 20 years anniversary of China joined WTO. And as a matter of fact, since China joined WTO, China's import from the world has gone up 6 times, and China's export to the world has gone up 7 times, according to WTO numbers. And of course, China now still provides the largest public goods, the Shanghai import-export, the largest in the world, and probably the only one now happening. So there are feelings. I think it's really, China is dependent on how Western countries view China. And President Xi and President Biden in their last week's virtual summit, and President Biden said something very significant. He said, okay, U.S. does not seeking to change China, and U.S. does not seek alliance against China, and also the U.S. recognizes one China policy. So I think those are really what Chinese government wants to reassure from U.S. So if U.S. does not seek to change China, if that is really the new attitude, I noticed that President Biden also said during his withdrawal from Afghanistan, from now on, U.S. do not seek nation building anymore. So which means they don't, 20 years ago when they welcomed China join WTO, they think, okay, China will become one of us, we'll converge. But now, they recognize the fact, China probably is quite unique, and they have a long history and its own characteristics. But it's also a good force for the world. They contribute 1/3 of the global GDP, and then GDP growth actually, and also largest trading nation with 130 countries. So if that, gradual acceptance of China is starting to emerge, I think, in the long run, we probably can still have a good relations. But now it's adjustment time. It's really difficult because there's a lot of expectation, probably different. What's happening is not different. But China is doing relatively fine. It's been a stabilizer of the global economy and become the largest market probably in a short time. So I think this kind of understanding and mutual acceptance is very important.
So the perception then of what's happening in China is that what America and the Europeans are doing is now viewing China as a really strong, potent rival and competitor, but not as an enemy. Would that summarize it correctly from Beijing's point of view?
Yeah, I think that's probably from Beijing's government position. I think that's probably we do not afraid of a competition. Let's have a friendly competition and Olympic style competition, but rather we do not view each other as a confrontation. So cooperation, competition, but not confrontation. I think confrontation is not something I think we don't want. But also we didn't hear from President Biden in his latest talk with President Xi, where I think at Alaska, where Secretary Blinken put up, this 3C, confrontation, cooperation, and competition. So I think there's competition. I think of course, being an economy always have. And then there's also cooperation, like COP26, China, US issued joint statement to cooperate on the climate change. So if that is the attitude, I think that, that's the thing we are trying to work on in the future, reduce the confrontation and increase the cooperation while we compete peacefully. At the same time, I think President Xi put up 3 principles, respect each other, peaceful coexistence, and also win-win. So that's probably the 3 factors that we still, stick to.
And just sticking with Europe, I mean, and take the 2 leading sort of nations of Europe, Germany and France. Is the perception in Beijing that Germany and France are sort of open to further dialogue, or have moved slightly to a more hostile position? I mean, where would you say the balance lies, first of all in Berlin and then in Paris, between those 3 C's, confrontation, cooperation, and competition? Where do you think the balance between those 3 lies in those 2 very important European capitals?
Well, I think that we had a new chancellor now in Germany, and Scholz. I was with him at the Munich Security Conference at the same panel just about a year ago, and what I think is actually, they all emphasize. Even President Macron has also emphasized the strategic independency for Europe. That's important to have, and so I would think that EU would probably emphasize more on the cooperation, competition, and there's no reason to confront China. I mean, or have a rivalry relationship. So probably there could be peaceful competition. Even they would say, okay, the system in China, the way that they run the business, or the technology and many things, high-speed railway. There could be many areas of competition, but certainly there's many ways of cooperation. For example, old auto manufacturers from EU China is their largest market. BMW, Daimler, and Peugeot or Volvo, whatever. So all are working very actively in China. So I think that Europe certainly, geographically we're so far away. We do not have a geographic conflict, and as we're having with U.S. Frequently challenging China. So I think certainly will be different, and I think that EU relation with China, particularly from France and Germany, and even including Italy and Spain, should be, China would be one of the largest trading partners, and that trade relation somehow will continue, and that also will lead to more people-to-people exchanges, and stabilize the relationship somehow, and gradually improve it.
And what about Britain? Lastly, before I give you an opportunity to ask me about,
Yes.
Give you a view from Europe more, but how does Beijing see Britain? Because the UK is definitely prioritizing the United States. Inevitably, since our departure from the European Union, and that's affecting Britain's policies towards China, as we saw recently in the launch of the AUKUS military alliance with the United States and Australia. So how does Beijing view post-Brexit UK? As friend or foe, or somewhere between those 2?
I think it's kind of a mix, because UK. I mean, since Theresa May mentioned about Global Britain, I mean that's the policy now. British government seems to adopt, and now they're getting out of the EU, but then they are looking far east, and of course this AUKUS has really, I think that created a lot of bad feelings. But I also see, Prime Minister Johnson also mentioned, he doesn't want, he still wants to do business with China. He views China still as a corporation mode, and he doesn't want to boycott Winter Olympics and things like that. Particularly, UK now is trying to join the CPTPP, right, which is also part of a Asia-Pacific economic arrangement. So I think, in that case, economically, UK can play more active role in terms of, promoting the trade with Asia, with China. So I still see the UK has a lot of, at least in China is not necessarily completely negative, but of course, we hope that we can see more positive from UK. The AUKUS certainly is very negatively perceived. I think that is really not helpful.
Shall we?
Okay.
Shall we discuss more what's going on in Europe then?
Yeah, that's what I would like to ask you, Lord Mandelson, because you are the expert on Europe. You have been looking after EU for so long, trade fairs. So what's your impression, from European perspective on China, and how do you see the future EU-China relations? I mean, as a Chinese think tank, we really, and also in general, all the Chinese business people would like to know, because traditionally EU and China are quite friendly countries, and since China opened up, and there are so many people to be exchanges going on. So, and also business, Europeans doing a lot of business in China. So what's your take on the relationship?
I mean, I would say that the situation is quite nuanced. And I would say that in most European countries, the official sort of governmental attitudes to China have not yet firmly settled. They are definitely evolving. There's definitely more focus, that change of tone towards China that I described. But in a sense, that's inevitable, partly because of China's amazing sort of economic and trade growth internationally. And, in Europe, they're certainly waking up to the fact that we've got a really massive competitor on our hands. But at the same time, there is a strong desire in Europe to be part of the China growth story. So on the one hand, people in Europe, in a sense, feel more threatened by China than they did. And they definitely feel that President Xi Jinping has, adopted, a rather more assertive approach to world affairs. People say in Europe that Mao Zedong enabled China to stand up, that Deng Xiaoping started to make China rich, and that what Xi Jinping is now doing is making China powerful. And Europe is sort of taking note of that and taking stock and evaluating how we're going to come to terms with that fast-growing economy of China's and its presence in the global economy, but also how a more powerful China is going to assert itself in the rest of the world, within the international system, whether China is really going its own way and in a sense trying to create a parallel Chinese-dominated Chinese system, or whether instead China wants to remain part of an evolving post-war international system, but simply wants it to adapt and to take on reforms that take on in greater account of China's rising power. So this debate is quite a keen one going on in Europe. But as of now, of course, we're now in a position where the EU and China have each sanctioned each other's public officials. I mean, this is not good. And that's why the investment agreement, the CAI, has been suspended, the ratification in the European Parliament, I mean. Now, of course, the United States was never keen on this investment agreement between Europe and China, which, you know, is a bit rich, because actually what the agreement does is to catch up with what the United States itself has already agreed and already put in place with China. I mean, we're trying to play catch up here in Europe. But what we're facing now is a situation where the United States, and this is a continuation under President Biden from President Trump, you know, seems to want to build a common front with the European Union on global economic, technological, and standard-setting issues. In effect, a common front, you know, directed against China. Now, this is not entirely straightforward, because the United States has transatlantic economic and trade tensions of its own with the European Union. So it's both trying to bring the European Union into this sort of common front against China, whilst at the same time, you know, managing to alienate and upset many in Europe because of its approach to trade. Yeah. And the reason for this is that America's domestic policies is pulling it in a more protectionist, more isolationist direction. And that affects its transatlantic political, economic, and trade relationship with Europe. And it's not pleasing the European Union. And I think that in a sense, this highlights a wider problem for the United States, including in Asia Pacific, where the US is trying to build political alliances to offset China's power in the region, but without extending trade opportunities to those countries it wants on its side. And in that sense, America's global strategic interests and its domestic political pressures are really clashing. They're not aligned. And I think this is quite a dilemma for the Biden administration. I'd say that the EU as a whole and most European countries, and this needs to be emphasized by me, are clear that they are not neutral between the US and China. I mean, we are in Europe, American allies and partners, first and foremost. But they also in Europe, European governments, don't want to feel that they're being forced to make a binary choice between the US and China.
Yes.
And for now, they believe that they can avoid doing so. You know, and they also, frankly, do not support a trajectory leading to a new Cold War between the West and China. And many in Europe fear that there are some in the United States, not necessarily, obviously, the American administration, but that there are others, powerful elements in the United States that want to create that new Cold War with China. And there's strong resistance in Europe to that. As for the UK, the approach of the Johnson government to China sits more in the European mainstream, you know, albeit caring more about the China cybersecurity dimension and potential threat than perhaps some do in Europe. The British government has decided to step away, for example, from the agreement previously made for Chinese involvement in Britain's civil nuclear power building program. Now, having said this, outside areas of critical infrastructure, like the civil nuclear program, outside those areas, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has sought a better relationship with China. And it was, in fact, American and his own backbench pressure in his own party that forced him into a tougher position on Huawei, notably, than the one he originally wanted to take. But you have to understand that the UK's greater dependence on the United States, now that we're out of the European Union, means, frankly, it's more difficult for Britain to steer that middle course that ideally it would like to take on China. I mean, perhaps I could just touch on Taiwan for one moment. I mean, most in Europe and also additionally Britain do not want to see further complications arising over Taiwan, although there are some smaller EU member states in Central and Eastern Europe, including, for example, Lithuania, which are actively stepping up engagement with Taiwan. Some people are talking about Taiwan independence, knowing that this is very provocative to China and to policymakers in Beijing. The European Commission was itself discussing plans for an upgraded trade cooperation framework with Taiwan, but this has been put very much on hold, reportedly by the European Commission's President, Ursula von der Leyen. Now, what this signals is that Brussels does not want to provoke a breakdown with Beijing over Taiwan and does not want to encourage a break by Taiwan from the current status quo. French President Emmanuel Macron does not have an interest in ruining strong business ties with China over Taiwan, and Germany likewise, obviously under Merkel, but now under Olaf Scholz, who I've known very well for 20 years and have discussed China with on a number of occasions. He will remain wary of provoking or stepping on Beijing's toes over Taiwan.
Yeah, no, thank you, Lord Mandelson. I think your analysis is quite wide-ranging and reflect some of the key messages. Of course, I think EU has its strategic independence, and even President Biden said he doesn't want to build up alliance against China, or he doesn't want to divide into camps. I mean, he said that at the UN General Assembly this year as well. So, but in reality, I think it would be extremely difficult for US to set up an alliance against China. And of course, I appreciate that EU doesn't also want to see Taiwan issue, is really got out of hand. In Taiwan independence really is like President Xi said, is playing with fire. So I think that I certainly highly value that your comment that this EU strategic independence. I mean, it's really important. So as a matter of fact, if I want to maybe follow up on that, is because value-wise, I mean, I can see European countries are more leanward towards United States, but economic-wise, I mean, EU and China are in such a large business relation. For example, the China Asian European continental trade has gone up 50%, and this year has gone up 50% last year. There's a huge cargo of trains of goods moved between Eurasia connecting on those railways even. So what do you think of this potential that would be someday, European countries will say, okay, look, I mean, China may have a different system with us, but China, can be, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, you cannot expect China so quiet and so low profile. I mean, it's already grown up. I mean, it's no longer children anymore. So then can we really deal with China as an adult, as a grown up, and also as an equal partner, rather than we say, oh, China was really quiet in the past, how come you are not talkative? Maybe, if China KPI is doing well, if China can contribute to the global prosperity and lift 800 million people out of poverty, no refugees, no those disruptions. Why can't EU accept China and get along?
I think that's a strong argument you're making, and it appeals to many in Europe. But I think what people would also say in Europe is that they want to see China stepping up a bit more and taking on and exercising greater responsibility, for managing difficult global questions. I think that, for example, China's role in COP26 was extremely important. For all the reasons that we understand. Go for COP26, and I think that there is a question mark in people's minds about whether or how far China is going to be prepared to take on the responsibilities of such a great and rising power within the international system. To what extent is it really going to perform and behave like a responsible stakeholder in the international system, and itself take initiatives and show leadership, for example, in respect of the rules-based international trading system and the WTO and its rule book? Is China going to take the lead in saying, well, actually, yes, the WTO's rule book does need to be updated. It does need to be reformed, for example, to take account of, heavy state subsidies of industry of the sort that we see in China. And I think that people in Europe and the United States would feel encouraged and would feel better towards and about China if they felt China was taking the initiative more in trying to make the international system stronger, its rules modernized, and for the multilateral system to perform better for everyone's interests.
No, I certainly agree with you that China should be more active as a stakeholder of the global stake, and China is probably trying to do that. For example, China is already the second largest donor to the United Nations system, the largest peacekeeping from a permanent member of the Security Council, and actually during the pandemic fighting now, China actually now is President Xi pledged $2 billion in helping developing countries. And President Biden pledged another $2 billion at the G7, and President Xi pledged another $2 billion in another, developing country conference. So I think that kind of a,
can I, since you mentioned developing countries, just put to you a question that's been put on the chat here from one of the participants.
Okay.
Who says, yes, China has grown up. But if it has grown up, lifting 800 million people out of poverty, what do you make of Beijing's insistence that China should still be considered as a developing country, thus demanding special and differentiated treatment in several international negotiations, such as those on fishery subsidies at the WTO? If China has grown up, as you say, why does it still demand the privileges and special treatment?
I think there's no. That's a good question. I mean, I think that there's a miscommunications probably to some extent. For example, China, even though they maintain the developing country status, is basically not to annihilate developing countries. China is actually a bridge between developing countries and the developed countries. China is already the largest developing country market, and for example, during the Shanghai Import Expo, a lot of developing countries selling to China. President from Argentina and president from South Africa all spoke on that. They're having the largest booth in the Shanghai Import Expo. So I think even for the WTO, treatment, China did not enjoy all developing status preferential treatment. Only probably a small portion now. China is gradually give up on many of those. Actually, China's tariff is already lower than their commitment to WTO, the tariff of entry. So China has the name of the developing country. Is really not, China think they are speaking up for developing countries. China representing a developing country in that sense, rather than China itself enjoying the developing country status or have that kind of a preferential treatment. No, China does not have many developing country preferential treatment anymore, actually. So I think that probably explains. But China does actually. China pledged twice to the developing country in terms $4 billion already for this pandemic. China donated a 2 billion vaccine to the developing country. US devoted 1 billion. So China is actually doing much better now. I think there's a lot of narrative and communication we need to really come up to the up to date.
Look, let's turn from government attitudes and relations to the business environment. In China and in Europe. President Xi said during his meeting last week with President Biden that it's important not to politicize economic relations. A bit late for that, possibly, but a couple of days after, Vice President Wang Huiyao, who I remember very well because he was my counterpart when we set up the EU-China high-level mechanism to try and iron out some of the tensions and difficulties we were having then. Wang Huiyao said that China remains open as ever to foreign businesses. But at the same time, China's Ministry of Commerce, in its 5-year plan that was published in late October, said that it believed foreign investment into China would stagnate or even drop over the coming years. Now, what's your view on this and the reason for it? Is it because foreign enterprises are being discouraged by their home governments from investing in China, and they're feeling more inhibited in investing more in China because of what's going on at home? Or does it also have something to do with a more challenging environment being created in China for foreign businesses, that it's more complicated to invest and to be present in China's economy, and therefore forcing foreign businesses to look elsewhere for their investment opportunities? What do you think is the explanation for that stagnation that the Ministry of Commerce has referred to?
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for this interesting question. Actually, I was at just right after Vice President Wang Qishan's speech at Bloomberg New Economy Conference. I was interviewed by Bloomberg. I think what Vice President Wang Qishan said exactly correct. China is going to maintain open. I will continue to open. I think that's also President Xi said that to President Biden as well. And basically, China, in the last number of years, China already set up 21 free trade special zone already, and including the Hainan Island, the largest special trade port that in China has been established. So that the negative shock at least has been narrowing and cutting down, but also China now is really embracing more openness, and foreign investment law just implemented since last year already. So they're welcoming more foreign investment in China. I mean, Tesla built the largest clean energy automobile plant in China, and Universal Studio opened the largest Universal Studio parks in Beijing as well. So there's many things happening. What I think most MOFCON's comment on the 5-year plan that was made during the last year. Maybe there's still trade war going on, and so they become more realistic a little bit because of this tariff or because of this U.S. sanctions. So also China has experienced high growth for so many years. I mean, naturally, you're going to probably plateau a little bit and then stabilize somehow. But I think still China has maintained over 8% growth this year, and I can see that China has 400 million people into the middle class. It's going to be 500 million, 600 million. So China is still going to be the largest market. And then also the digital economy is also flourishing in China. Now China has 1 billion smartphone users, and already counting about 38% of China's GDP now. So I think the business opportunity for European companies are still the same. Yeah.
Let's drill down a little bit more into this, because the list of industries that are restricted in China to state investment, restricted to state investment, whether it be Chinese private or foreign private investment, that restricted list is shrinking gradually. But some industries still remain sensitive in China. New ones such as education have also seen more restrictions for foreign investors. Now, this seems to be linked to President Xi's focus on national security and his sensitivity about access to and ownership and use of data of Chinese people. On the other hand, Beijing is happy to express a preference for those sectors where foreign expertise is needed. I mean, including healthcare, automobiles, as you've said, and even critical technologies such as aerospace technology and semiconductors. Indeed, the latest 5-year plan for 2021 to 2025 said China will support more foreign investment in R&D activities. So it's difficult to get a clear picture here. Policy seems to be going in slightly different directions. I mean, do you think that this will continue, this sort of trend, or in response to European and US investment blocks on China? And we've just seen a report in the United States setting out a whole raft of ways in which Chinese investment and presence in the US economy should be restricted. Do you think the Chinese government will be tempted to adopt a sort of similar sort of tit-for-tat policies and restrictions in its own economy directed against foreign investment?
I think that the Chinese government is quite actually reserved, very prudent. You know, they are not rushed to do any. For example, we see US has come up with many entity lists. We haven't seen many entity lists coming up from Chinese side, actually, right? And so I think, you know, this because this opening up and open door policy has already been carried on, emphasized again and again, also in the latest party documents as a national policy. So I think that is going to continue. Otherwise, why China open up 21 free international trade zone? I mean, if they don't want to open up, why have set up 21 provincial municipal free trade zones? So I think that is going to continue to open, and for sure, even financial market has been very obvious open already. Insurance and as far as the education is concerned, I mean, there's overburden of the student pupils and so I think some government crackdown on that is really to balance the lives of a common prosperity of the ordinary folks, not too much pressured onto this unnecessary competition of the youngsters. So there's some adjustment on those, but that doesn't really mean that they're against foreign companies. So I think there's quite a bit of explanation needs to be communicated well, so that we don't have that misunderstanding. But in general, I know that China still have a very much welcome. So these days in China, not every week is not going by without a huge trade fair here or there in any provinces or any municipalities. It's all welcoming foreigners.
What about IP rights and protection? Because this has been a very sensitive issue for foreign companies in China, because they are very alive to the risk, the danger of IP theft or IP leakage, if I can use that neutral term. Now, my old friend Chen Deming, the former Minister of Commerce, who I worked with when I was Trade Commissioner, he has called for a paradigm shift in how the Chinese government deals with IP. What do you think this will mean in practice? I mean, President Xi has talked about a new rule of law society, which places greater emphasis on property rights and effective dispute resolution through the courts. Do you think there's going to be a real step forward that foreign investors and businesses will benefit from in respect of IP rights and protection in China? Or is this still at the rhetorical stage?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned about Minister Chen Demi. He's a senior advisor of CCG. And what I think China now, it's probably different than what 10 years ago. For example, China now wants to join CPTPP. And one of the first priority for CPTPP, you have to have IPR protection. Because China now is already the largest applicant of patents already. There's more worries from Chinese companies are worried about their IPs being lost. And so this kind of a culture is really very much emphasized now. China just had a new foreign investment law implemented, and any violation of IPR would be severely punished. So I think that is already there. But Mr. Lord Mandelson, I would like to ask you, for example, China actually wants to invest in EU and in many other countries. China has a huge investment capacity now, and China infrastructure-wise is probably one of the best in the world now. And then G7 actually, including EU, has proposed this Build Back Better World, B3W. And why not BRI and B3W can work together, and maybe Chinese investment into EU can be more. I mean, even companies like Huawei. I mean, there's too much talking about that, but it's really a practical, a very efficient company. I mean, so we cannot enjoy the benefit of these inventions or advanced technology from China. Rather, we are now have this geopolitical concern that we are throughout bathwater with babies now. So what's your take on that for Chinese business investment in Europe?
Very good question, and a lot to unpick there. I mean, on Huawei, there was just a feeling, but it was driven, as we know, very strongly by the US administration under President Trump, that to have Huawei absolutely at the core of our sort of telecom and 5G core infrastructure was too great a danger. You describe Huawei as a private company, and technically it is, but it's also seen as close to the Chinese state and willing and able to cooperate strongly with Chinese intelligence and military authorities. Now, because of that perception, there was a feeling that in Europe we had to be much more guarded, that we had to put in place quite strict protocols that kept Huawei kit and Huawei equipment more towards the periphery of our connectivity, of our infrastructure, rather than at the core, in order to limit the risk or the danger that Huawei's supply may be taken advantage of by Chinese state authorities. Now, that, as we know, was not good enough for President Trump. He wanted Huawei equipment completely stripped out.
Yeah,
the unfolding 5G network, out of 4G as well. But putting Huawei aside just for one moment, I mean, what's going on in Europe is a great debate about how autonomous Europe should be in economic, industrial, technological terms, whether there is such a thing as technological sovereignty, European sovereignty, that can be expounded and implemented, that would make Europe essentially resilient, self-sufficient, and not dependent actually on either the United States or China in key industrial sectors and technologies. It's actually, this emerging doctrine of strategic autonomy, or open strategic autonomy, because Europe doesn't want to give the impression it's closing its markets and closing its economies to outsiders, but is nonetheless being more vigilant about the resilience and self-reliance that it needs to operate. This is something that's emerged in the EU essentially since Britain left, and in some people's view, since we saw French influence growing in the EU. I mean, essentially, it seeks to promote the integrity and control of strategic value chains in areas such as vehicle manufacturing, payments, energy, chemicals, and it seeks to reduce dependency on certain products or services that are produced outside the EU, and or to different standards from those in Europe. Now, in this sense, you could see it as an evolution of Europe's traditional desire for a level playing field, between Europe and the rest of the world. Although some think that actually strategic autonomy is a rather cute modern word meaning protectionist.
Yeah, no, I think this kind of a mistrust issue is really severely, damaged the trade relations. I mean, Huawei about 10, 15 years ago almost sold completely to Motorola, already passed the Huawei, and the Motorola board turned it down. If it's a government-owned, it cannot be sold to Motorola. But also, if we have that kind of amplifier on the security, then what about, Boeing we've been writing? What about, all those automobile made by foreign company in China? It's all can be, national security issues. So that's really, we have to really come to terms on how we can work together, actually.
But what we're seeing, Dr. Wang, let's be frank, is national security, which at one level is a completely legitimate concern, by the way, and we need to protect ourselves, each of us do, from cyber disruption or invasion from hostile actors. But at the same time, national security is being overused and overemployed as a pretext for protectionism.
Absolutely.
Quite honestly. Now, I think that in Europe, it's going to take some time for this whole approach to unfold and clarify. But it's equally clear, more broadly, that Brussels is looking at China as a strategic competitor, more in economic and trade relations. This is reflected in communications and policy themes coming out of Brussels. And it means that the EU, for example, is going to strengthen its policy toolkit to rebalance its bilateral relations with Beijing in respect of new measures on FDI investment screening, the proposed foreign subsidies instrument and the international procurement instrument that is being developed in the EU, which seeks to ban foreign companies that receive state subsidies from being eligible to compete in government procurement. I mean, and let's be clear what that means. In Europe, they want to have an open market on government procurement, but they feel that Chinese competitors are so subsidized by the Chinese state that it's creating an unfairness in competition between Chinese companies and European ones. And what Brussels is seeking to do is to balance this up and use policy instruments to make sure that there's a more level playing field. There are other policy instruments that are being considered in Brussels, a new corporate due diligence policy that will ban the sale of goods produced with forced labor, for example. And you need to be very well aware that the position of the Uyghur population in China has attracted huge attention and debate and concern in Europe. And there's a real feeling that, that we're taking goods from China that shouldn't just be viewed, in terms of their country of origin. I mean, where they come from, but how those goods are made, and are they made through the involvement of what some people
there's a
slave labor. So this is another area which is opening up of great sensitivity in Europe.
I think that's exactly where the mistrust coming from, because for the issue of Xinjiang, the forced labor is really, it's not true at all, because 70% of the so-called cotton picking of forced labor, but 70% of cotton picking is right done by machine now. There's no labor there, actually. And then, people don't come to Xinjiang. I mean, Xinjiang is open to all foreigners to come and visit. I mean, if they come to see with their own eyes, they will draw a different conclusion. But also talking about subsidy and things like that. That's exactly, I think you're right. We should have international policies to coordinate that. I mean, that's why China wants to join CPTPP, where there is a course on SOE reform, and competitive neutrality could probably be the case that China would be interested, and also let's reform WTO, not blocking it, not blocking the judges. And China is willing to have all those multilateral system. That's why China is always saying, the multilateral system of UN, WTO should be, supported. I think we should really talking through all those platforms.
Yeah, I mean, we're nearing now the last 3 or 4 minutes of this. I mean, we could carry on talking about this.
Sure, yes.
I must say, but I mean, what's clear is that it's what's being created in Europe is a fairly complicated picture for Chinese businesses and investors to make sense of and to navigate. And I think, probably what I would say in conclusion is that for Chinese investors and businesses looking to Europe, it requires detailed understanding by them of this landscape, this picture that I've been trying to describe. And it requires by them a fairly proactive political strategy as to, how to navigate their presence in Europe and the UK. I mean, it's simply not sufficient anymore to undertake activity in Europe and Britain and hope that it won't be subject to increased scrutiny. It will. There is now much greater scrutiny of Chinese investment and presence in our markets than ever before. And I think that where we have seen businesses execute transactions and investments successfully is where they've deliberately done all their thinking beforehand and their planning and identified the risks that they face, and then sought to build a program of engagement in Europe to manage those risks. I mean, managing the risks that come from political and parliamentary stakeholders, from regulators and competition authorities and investment authorities, and broader influencers, by the way, like third parties and non-government organizations and others, which have the potential to raise awareness and focus attention around a proposed transaction. Now, what Chinese businesses and investors need to know in advance is who is active on this landscape, who are the regulators, who are the authorities who are going to take an interest in this, who are the political and parliamentary stakeholders who are going to speak up about this. They need to understand this in Europe. Otherwise, it's going to come as a bit of a shock to them that they're facing such a complicated situation. And of course, it's further complicated by the fact that not each European country is the same. Not each European country has an identical investment screening mechanism. And your investment success rate is going to be better in some European countries and less than others. It's a very complicated landscape, is really what I'm saying. And Chinese investors need to realize that and anticipate some of the problems and take good advice about it.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you, Peter. I think that, during the President Xi and Chancellor Angela Merkel and the EU President, their virtual summit not too long ago, they actually identified digital economy and also climate change as the two areas that they can strengthen the collaboration. And also on the climate change, there's a lot of technology being China developed already. China is now the largest clean energy, clean automobile producer in the world now, largest wind power producer, largest solar power producer, and also largest hydropower producer. So I think on the climate change, the clean technology China developed could actually, benefit China-European cooperation in the future. So there could be way, let's build up the trust and gradually improve that. I think you're right. We have to really continue the dialogue on that, and we should really look forward to future cooperation. Yeah.
Since you say that, Dr. Wang, during the dialogue that we organized between European CEOs and chairs with Premier Li earlier this year, a cooperation on green technologies, software, finance became very prominent in that discussion. And there's huge potential, which certainly falls into the cooperation basket as opposed to the confrontation.
Absolutely, yes.
Time is our enemy. We've run out. This conversation has flown by, and it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. And I'm sure on behalf of all the participants in this event, I'd like to express my gratitude to you for taking the time you have and explain things so clearly and so patiently to us.
No, thank you, Lord Mandelson. You spoke well. Also this kind of communication is very important, and I thank for so many viewers online, and I really appreciate this dialogue opportunity. Thank you also very much.
All right.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. See you. Bye-bye.
See you.
Take care.